Well, let's move on because carers across the North West say they're being criminalised unfairly after wrongly receiving benefits. The government's taking action over paying them the carers allowance for a number of years. But a Department for Work and Pensions whistleblower has told this programme that vulnerable people are being punished for mistakes the department could and should be preventing. In 2010, George Henderson from Leyland began receiving carers allowance, a benefit currently worth £64.60 a week, to look after his son John, who has learning difficulties and is addicted to heroin.
How you doing now?
At the time, he worked as a taxi driver, earning over £120 a week, but claims he wasn't aware that stopped him qualifying for the payment.
If they'd have checked, they'd have seen I was actually working. I've ticked the wrong box. Right, I shouldn't have got it. But they should have made me aware. You're not entitled to that.
After receiving the money for 7 years, he was found guilty of benefit fraud.
I'm actually down as a criminal. I'm a fraudster. That's what they've done with me.
The Carers Allowance Unit is run mainly from these offices in Preston and another base in Blackpool. In the summer, staff here were informed there had been a huge increase in the number of claimants identified as receiving the benefit when they were no longer entitled. Some had been getting it for over 5 years wrongly, and now they're being prosecuted. In July, following more detailed analysis by the department, the number of carers suspected of fraud increased fourfold to more than 10,000. Of those, over 1,000 are facing criminal prosecution because of the amount they've received. In some cases, carers have been paid £20,000 they weren't entitled to. A whistleblower claims staffing at the unit has halved since 2007, and one former manager says the prosecutions are due to basic annual checks no longer being done.
It's never happened before, as far as I'm concerned. The most that somebody would probably be overpaid by in the past would be about a year.
What's your response to people who say, well, it's their own fault for claiming it?
No one's disputing that claimants have an obligation to tell the DWP about changes in circumstances, but if they don't do that and the department gets information that they can act upon, then the department's complicit in perpetuating that overpayment when it could all have been prevented with early action.
Problems with the carers allowance is something the charity sector is increasingly aware of.
It's really important that the DWP goes back and has a look at what information was given to people and whether they had enough information to make the right decisions and whether they understood it. Benefits are really complicated, and it just highlights the real need for picking up mistakes or errors early.
In response, the government told us it's misleading to suggest it's allowing vulnerable people to face criminal prosecution. It says it is right that we take appropriate action and have a duty to the taxpayer to recover outstanding money in all cases of fraud or error. So Mary, so the gist of this is that the whistleblower claims big cutbacks in staff meant the basic checks aren't being doing, so these people are ending up misclaiming, getting it incorrectly for a number of years, and they're being prosecuted as a result of staff cuts.
And we know that carers do an absolutely tremendous job, and really our system couldn't function without them. So we have to show them the respect that they deserve for the work that they do, and that is why they have carers allowance. It was for just that purpose. It's really important that we are clear about how this has occurred, and particularly in terms of the way that the system has worked in the past. Now, I would want to know whether people were fully aware of when they needed to let the DWP know about the changes of circumstances, and also whether the DWP have given enough information to people to make them aware that that's what they need to do.
Well, Lisa, in a statement, the government has said that it makes it absolutely clear to people that you can't earn more than £120 a week, and if your circumstances change, you're legally obliged to tell them.
Well, even the name carers allowance suggests that it's not means tested, so there are a lot of people who are understandably quite confused about that. But it's also that, as Mary was saying, there are people at the most difficult times of their lives claiming carers allowance, often for relatives who are ill, sometimes dying, and it's really unreasonable not to show them compassion. For me, this is just a feature of the system nowadays, is that there is a lack of compassion for the people who are going through it at the very time they most need it. And there's also chaos generally prevailing across the system. So we've had all these problems with universal credit and a complete refusal to listen to areas like mine that had universal credit 4 years early.
Well, there are rules around benefits, aren't there? There's clear rules about whether you qualify or you don't, and if people aren't qualifying for a number of years, do they not have some responsibility? Is it not partly fraudulent if some of them must have been aware.
But the DWP itself realises that it's quite difficult for people to know what those rules are, and that's why every year they've checked carers allowance claimants' earnings against tax records, and they stopped doing that a few years ago, and that's where this chaos has arisen from. And the problem is that when you, as a Member of Parliament, when you try to take these cases to ministers, they just say, well, that's the system, and we're not going to do anything about it. They can't continue to set their face against this because we're seeing the human cost, and the system needs to change.
Mary, is this, as Lisa says, another sign of a failing welfare system? You've got universal credit problems, you've got over £1.5 billion not paid to people on sick benefit, as was revealed this week. This is another sign of the funding cuts having an impact.
Well, let's be honest about this. Universal credit is seeing more people than ever into work. This is the benefits really starting to show through. But in all of
Many
this,
people would dispute that. Even lots of your own MPs are saying the government's got to put the £2 billion back because it's not functioning.
And we need to iron out any problems as they come along and do it quickly. And I think speed of recognition of an issue and dealing with it quickly is what we need to see.